Chapter 7. The sky was cloudless and tinged with red. Then suddenly the sun appeared over brown hills in the distance. And though the day was early, it was already a hot one. For an hour Anders had fretted over his next move. He faced the road now, thinking about his situation. Then images of Steve came into his mind. Just Steve wearing that tea towel and laughing that laugh. And after that, Anders wasn't sure. He wasn't sure about any of it. For reality and Trip had now merged into one foggy nightmare. Feeling trapped, he moved slightly. The thorns of the bush hurt him, and he blinked, wincing in pain. Then he looked down, then up again. There were 2 pubs across the road, and he surveyed them, eyeing their wooden balconies which reminded him of the Old Crow. That's where he wanted to be now, sat at the table with the possum, with his memory intact. Then he looked to his left. He saw a bistro-style cafe, a bus stop, a barber shop, and a ponytailed man walking back and forth over his own footsteps, pinching a cigarette between his fingers. He drew on it and stopped suddenly, staring at his shoes. Then he watched himself for a moment. He watched himself smoke in the shop windows. Anders watched him while he watched himself. Anders watched from a funny position. From the bush, he was half in, half out, arms bleeding, neck scratched. Again he thought about his situation. He puffed his cheeks and looked away. There was nothing but dirt path and acacia trees and bush, a long curvy line of bush which was parallel with the path and the road. He touched the sides of his mouth with his tongue, tasting weed. He sucked his teeth. He dug his elbows into the sandy dirt and dragged himself through the bush and lay in the dirt, arms and legs trembling, scratched, bleeding. After a short rest, he crawled up a grass-covered slope towards a tree. Nearer to the road now, the car smoke got to him. He kept low and coughed, crawling over tree roots, resting his face on a piece of cool bark. Gently he stroked his ribs, feeling rough scratches with his fingers, and then moved them over his hair, which was thick with dirt and twigs. He puffed his cheeks again and looked at the bush. The sun rose, taking his shade, and a glow appeared over his body. It's time to move again, he thought, and he set off towards the next tree, a larger one with more foliage. There he kept low with his belly in the dirt, studying the area, figuring a way home. He wished he'd woken earlier, or woken on the other side of the bush. Then he wondered how he came to be there at all, stuck face down in the dirt like that. He stared for a second at his bleeding arms. Going back through the bush was not an option. He knew that much. It was painful enough the first time. He touched his legs. He looked at his arms again. The damned thing had shredded him good. Now on his feet, he began stumbling towards another tree, then another, appearing between each one, walking as though stepping on hot coals, skipping and hopping, making an O shape with his lips, then quickly blowing through them, blowing sharply as though putting out a candle. He fell. He slumped over more tree roots and lay there sweating. Muddy beads of perspiration dripped into his eyes, and he rubbed them with his palms. Then he came onto his elbows and noticed something glistening beside a pile of red rocks. He blinked, feeling his eyes again. Maybe, he whispered, and if his spectacles were there, what else? From behind the tree he studied the bus stop. There was a bunch of school kids knocking about football and playing a game of keepy-uppy. He watched for a while, tallying their progress. He saw a woman there too, sat staring forward, ignoring the gambling group around her. She looked pleasant in her turtleneck sweater, he thought, pleasant but fed up, and she kept having to slap the ball away from her face or roll it back to them, while the boisterous scoundrels cheered sarcastically. Seeing them as his biggest threat, he kept watching the road and the bus stop area. He arched forward and sat up. He did this with one foot on his lap and began pinching his toes with a thumb and forefinger, squeezing thorns from them. Some bled, some spat yellow pus. His eyes watered. He turned in the direction of the red rocks again. They seemed close, he thought. Maybe there's more stuff that way. Also, he noted a gate further on, which led to farm fields and the other side of the bush. That bush, he smiled. He thought about being on the other side, wading through high grass with nobody around him. It seemed a good idea. It was nice to have a plan. It was nice to know he was going home soon. The idea brought a smile to his face. He set off crawling, twitching his body now and then as salty compounds from the dirt got into his cuts. He kept low, stayed beside the traffic, moving in its shadows. A cattle wagon slowed nearby, pushing onto the curb. At the back of the wagon were cows, pushing their heads between wooden planks, staring over him with their big white eyes. Birds flapped about in the trees, chasing each other branch to branch, knocking dust off the leaves. Now and then he paused, looking around, listening to engines ticking, horns beeping, kids laughing and football bouncing. The traffic was stop-start, slow but steady, and he moved in a similar rhythm, chest and belly on the dirt, heart thudding like crazy. At the rocks he found his spectacles and put them on. They hung wonky to the left, and when he touched the right lens, his finger felt a tiny crack. He didn't mind much though. He was happy to find something. He kept them on and peered over the rocks, hoping to find more stuff. Shorts maybe, a vest. But there was nothing. Just bush on one side and road on the other. He looked between them. Again, nothing. Just dirt, acacia trees, and the odd pile of rocks. Maybe they were on the other side of the bush, he thought. Then he looked at the gate and smiled, picturing himself on the other side, running through golden barley in slow motion, as though he were in a pop music video. He began to laugh. He felt good. Good, apart from the cuts and the headache and the memory loss. Out he crawled with blood, sweat and dirt drying across his back in different shades of red, grey and brown. But his belly was damp, and the dirt below it formed into mud. "I'm a commando," he said, digging in with his elbows, shuffling on. "I'm a commando, and I'm dressed commando." He laughed again. "Come now, Anders," he said. "Behave yourself." He kept moving. He was close now and not too far from the last tree, where he planned another short rest before making a run for the gate. He settled his breath, he closed his eyes and laughed again at his commando joke. "What's that?" a kid yelled suddenly from the bus stop. "That's a Sasquatch," answered his friend. "It's a Bigfoot," said another. "A Bigfoot is a Sasquatch, you dope," the first kid said, while shaking his head. Then they all laughed, all except for the woman in the turtleneck sweater.